Our next speaker is Peter Wharton from TAG Video Systems. And with so many possible points of failure in the OTT workflow, it's absolutely crucial to have robust monitoring solutions in place. Unfortunately, a lot of the hardware-based OTT monitoring can be expensive, and so providers have to make very painful prioritization decisions about what they can monitor and what they can't, leaving critical processes sometimes unchecked. So, Peter, welcome. You're going to talk about what TAG can present or what TAG is offering on the market for an alternative to some of those solutions.
Absolutely. Great to be here. Thank you so much. And I also want to thank Todd and Neil. I thought that was a really interesting presentation before this. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I like some of the solutions that the applications they were talking about at the end, particularly. Before we jump in specifically to talk about monitoring, let's talk a little bit big picture about OTT. What do you see as the biggest challenges in OTT right now?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head in the last session at the very beginning. Live streaming has to be seen as a first-class experience. It's no longer the stepchild to broadcasting. In many places, it's on par, and consumers don't differentiate between their experiences or where they're getting content. So it's really important that you have the same quality in your live streaming that you do in any other distribution platform, or you're going to have a customer experience that's going to negatively affect you across the board. I think that's the key message I get.
Okay, so having said that, what is the most efficient and effective way to monitor all that? How do you choose what's most important, what's less important, and how do you prioritize?
Well, and you can imagine if you were a broadcaster in the past, you monitored your transmitter. You had one thing to monitor, right? It wasn't
right.
exactly the hardest thing in the world. And then you started having cable and satellite distribution. You had to monitor those things too. And then you had your own website. Now you've got OTT platforms, you've got virtual MPVDs, you've got all this and that. You've got a zillion ways that your content's getting out there. And you need to make sure that your content throughout this entire distribution network maintains the quality that you start with, that your customers expect. And so you also now recognize that the content at some of these more distant nodes and distribution methods doesn't have as many viewers and therefore not the same value as the content where you originated from, right where it starts. So you have to figure out how to scale your monitoring to make it cost effective and across that entire distribution chain without ignoring those endpoints. And I think that's one of the key things here is it needs to be able to scale across a very large system. It needs to scale on demand because you have large events and you have small events, and then you also have the cost. You need to have the cost match the value of the content at each one of those places. And I think that those are the metrics that are really driving what our customers are looking for today.
So under the status quo or the way things have been done, you still need to buy licenses. You still need to buy hardware. That's a huge investment. Can you talk a little bit about that, and then we'll lead into talking about some alternatives?
Well, so licenses are and hardware are the old school way of doing things in some ways, because you bought equipment and you put it up there, and you basically bought the license because you bought the hardware. And we're moving obviously to a software model where you're running services, and ideally running those services where you need to run them. And the next thing is you want those services to scale so that you're able to actually run different levels of services at different monitoring points to match the value of that content. And then you also want a license model that is a consumption based. It's an OpEx based, so you can actually pay for just what you're consuming. And so we've done something really neat called adaptive monitoring, where you can sit there and you can monitor all those nodes in your network, but you can have a very lightweight monitoring at those more distant nodes. But when a problem occurs or when you want to look at something in more detail, you can ramp that up to the same full level monitoring you might put at the source. So it gives you the ability to actually see everything with the value you want, at the same time, never sacrificing the ability to actually do a deep dive and really make sure you're perfect at the very edge.
All right. That's all very innovative. It's a relatively new approach to do things. And a few years ago, it would have sounded impossible or crazy. But here we are. What can broadcasters do today to be prepared for the future?
Well, one of the things we're seeing is people moving to the cloud. And I've been having conversations with customers who, 3 or 4 years ago were not even looking at the cloud. And even 2 years ago, dabbled it and said, not for us. And now even stations, broadcasters and station groups are moving to the cloud because they see the value. And because now that more and more of their viewers are watching through OTT platforms and therefore watching from the cloud, it makes a lot more sense for them to put their origin and everything else they're doing in the cloud than leaving it on premises where it then has to go to the cloud and make that a failure point. So we're seeing this migration to the cloud. We're seeing it rapidly snowball as it happens. And so that enables an opportunity to run pure software solutions that are running basically on cloud hardware when you need them, the way you need them, and only when you want them. And I think that's the key there. And
Right.
it's that
And of course,
flexibility.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting. I was talking to one of our speakers yesterday about the cloud, and even a couple of years ago, I guess it was 2 years ago now, because I'm thinking about IBC and NAB, you'd walk around those shows and there was still some resistance among broadcasters to the cloud, whereas those of us in the streaming industry, I mean, that's been something we've embraced for years now, right? What do you think the tipping point was that made broadcasters finally realize that the cloud was where they needed to turn for these solutions? Or was it simply what you just said, which is the fact that they saw it working in OTT and realized that they needed to make it work for them?
Well, so first, the way it works in OTT is not necessarily the way it needs to work for broadcaster, because broadcasters have a different set of requirements, different distribution, and the other challenge they have is they have legacy, complex, dare I say, archaic workflows in some cases that they have managed to create over the last 40 years that they want to bring with them. And so part of it has been a cultural shift. One of the major broadcasters we're working with right now tried to move their first workflows to the cloud. That didn't work. They tried to start a new only OTT in the cloud. That kind of worked. But now they're doing a total rethink about how do I move to the cloud and leave all that baggage behind that I've built over the years and start clean, really do a greenfield kind of conceptual of how should I build a new media factory and ecosystem in the cloud, because I think that's really key. And so we're seeing that adoption. We're seeing actual companies that have done this successfully, starting like with Discovery, who moved all their play out in the cloud. We're now seeing like Viacom, CBS, who went and bought a whole facility that HBO left when they consolidated in Hauppauge to move their entire operations, and now it's become their cloud control center because it doesn't make as much sense to be a playoff facility as it does to be a hub for managing things. And so you see this shift of customers where they're starting to trust the cloud, and we're still at the tipping point because they're still moving a lot of traditional workflows and a lot of what we call lift and shift into the cloud. But the next phase is reinvention. The next phase is when they really stop doing the way things they have been doing them and actually think from the ground up, how should we be doing this? And I think what Todd and Neil talked about before, I actually believe that latency should stop being a problem. And this is me personally, but we actually can find new ways of building models that we sacrifice that latency to create entirely new economic and models with a whole new set of capabilities. And at the same time, we might actually find ways to fix that latency, like maybe we forget transport streams and we're HLS end to end sort of thing. So I think there's an opportunity here to totally reinvent how we do media. And that's going to change the world once we go to the cloud.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'd like to remind our audience that if you do have questions for Peter or any of our speakers, please enter them in the Q&A tab. Peter, you talked a little bit about the fact that, broadcasters typically had one thing to monitor, and they typically were working with standards. And some of these standards were in place for 30, 40 years, right? And once it was there, that's all they had to deal with. Whereas again, in the streaming industry, the OTT industry, standards are sort of met with skepticism. A lot of the great innovation has come in our industry by people and companies moving outside and pushing those standards. So the rate of change has been so much more rapid. It sounds like you're seeing broadcasters embrace that more rapid rate of change now.
I think they realize they have to. Mm-hmm. I mean, they realize that, John Honeycutt once said to me, infrastructure used to be an asset, now it's a liability, and from
right.
a discovery, and it's true, and so because they cannot predict the future, there are things we're building right now that we didn't even anticipate a year ago, for changes in the industry, and not just the consolidations and mergers and divestitures and all the rest of those things, but the way the technology shifts as well is constantly causing us to rethink how we do things. So I think it's really key that we build in an environment that allows us to make rapid change, and we don't have locked in investment into technologies and into applications and into an infrastructure that 6 months from now doesn't work for us. I mean, that's mission one. So that's where the cloud really, really flies. The other thing is that the live workflows that broadcasters have required is not exactly what OTT has delivered in the past. So it's that merger of the two together that's really changing now, where we're actually seeing the ability to really do live workflows in the cloud and live production starting to happen. So because only when they get their end-to-end workflow in the cloud do they get the economics they're looking for. And now what they really want is something that monitors that end-to-end. They need to monitor it from the live production side all the way to the OTT side, because it's consolidating those. Those used to be islands. Those used to be these silos of people who did production and post-production and play out and distribution, OTT. Those silos are breaking down. They have to break down. You don't get the economics if you don't break it down. So we're seeing that they're building all this now, and they want to be able to monitor all those things in one place. And that's really key also. And they want real-time monitoring. One of the things, a lot of times in the past in the OTT world, your monitoring was data. It was long-term analysis where you could see trends of audiences, which is important, but you could also see network performance and things. But when you start moving to the range of the value of the content that some of these networks have and broadcasters, they need to have eyes on glass and have immediate visibility into any issue. And not a minute from now or 30 seconds from now, but right now, they need to know when there's something going on. So it's that immediacy also that's key to what they're doing.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Peter. That was a great discussion. And obviously, people can learn more by visiting TAG Video Systems website.
Thank you so much. Great to be here. Thanks.
Thank you.